Welcome back to Glimpses of a Possible Future, brought to you by Makespace Oxfordshire. We're celebrating a handful of local projects that inspire us, great examples working towards spatial justice. Welcome back to Glimpses of a Possible Future. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Laura Harte, Director of the Berin Centre, a community hub in Berinsfield, South Oxfordshire. In this conversation we'll be deep diving into the story of the centre, whose origins date back more than 40 years, and which has been undergoing a phenomenal revival and is flourishing from recent years. Laura has been leading the Berin Centre since 2021, and last month she was kind enough to give me a tour where I got to meet some of the passionate team, explore the various sites and projects, and see for myself what a wonderful, welcoming, vibrant and bustling place it really is. As a community hub, the Berin Centre is the ultimate form of social infrastructure. Infrastructure is typically associated with roads and bridges, whereas social infrastructure is the absolute essential spaces and places that we rely on to support shared civic life, where people come together to build relationships, trust, and foster community. And the Berin Centre is one of only a few shining light examples in Oxfordshire that has arisen out of the devastating cuts and closures resulting from austerity. In 2015, the County Council closed more than 70% of the children and family centres, despite public outcry and protests. The Berinsfield Family Centre, as it was formerly known, was one of the centres destined to close, but local resistance and county-wide support ensured the centre was not only saved but revived for and by the local community, broadening its focus to encompass family, community and delicious local food. Laura has been leading the Berin Centre for more than 5 years, and prior to that worked and led a number of fantastic local community organisations, including Oxfordshire Youth, the mental health charity Recovery College, and we first met over 8 years ago now, I think it was, as part of the wonderful new initiative that you were founding, the Oxfordshire Discovery College, with a focus on young people's mental health. And you were indeed a founding resident of Makespace Aristotle Lane. So a very warm welcome, Laura.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. Let's dive straight into the conversation. And could you start by just telling us a little bit more about the Berin Centre, which you've been leading now for so many years, how it came about, what it does and how it does it?
We try to do a bit of everything, really. And that sometimes is a real strength, but it also makes it really hard to define what the Berin Centre is. It's not like we've got a carved out little niche of this is the kind of precise package of what we do. We try to be a bit of a one-stop shop for local people. So our work tends to fall into three main areas or pillars. We have family services, which is absolutely kind of the beating heart of what the Berin Centre is all about. Lots and lots of activities and provision for families with children under 5, right through from kind of antenatal support and programmes through to a peer support group for parents who've got children of any age where they can come together and just offload or chat and spend a bit of time together. So a really big package of support around children and families. We then have some community services, so that's support for adults on a one-to-one basis or through kind of social groups or classes and courses. And as part of that, we also have 2 community gardens within the village, which we tend, and we support people to develop sustainable gardening skills. And then we have some food services. So we have an emergency food bank, a community larder that runs once a week, and we recently built a cafe called The Burrow, which opened in September. So that's a new building for us and a whole new kind of area of our work where we're delivering healthy, delicious, affordable food to local people 4 days a week. And we're also running cooking classes alongside that.
Amazing. Yeah, it's a heck of a lot that you've packed in. And this is not a big team and it's not a vast site, but you bring it to life a little bit for the listeners in terms of what it looks and feels like. What do you find when you arrive there? Because it really is such a warm and welcoming space.
Well, I guess first you've got to arrive there. So Berinsfield is a small village in South Oxfordshire. It's about 10-15 minutes outside of Oxford Ring Road, just south of the city. And it is a village, it's a rural community, but there are no through roads through that village. So you'll never drive through Berinsfield on your way to somewhere else. which means it's largely undiscovered. People kind of sail up and down between kind of Wallingford and Oxford and just miss us because you can't really drive through. So if you find your way into Berinsfield, first of all, congratulations. We've got some wonderful amenities there, which lots of villages wouldn't have. There's us, but there's also a leisure centre and a library and a brilliant doctor's surgery, things that many villages don't have. And then when you find your way to us, we are pretty unassuming, I think. We're a little grey porter cabin right in the middle of the village. And that porter cabin is very well loved in the way that porter cabins are. Next to the porter cabin, we have the Burrow, which is a very new build. Lots of glass, lots of light, timber structure, a really beautiful space. So we've got these two little spaces right next to each other, and then some little gardens kind of nearby. And if you come into the centre, you will probably hear a lot of noise no matter when you come. We have sessions running all the time. And part of the reason for building our second building, that cafe, was because we were just bursting at the seams in our porter cabin, in our main building. There are things happening in every room a lot of the time. So phones are ringing, people are chatting, you'll hear the children singing. Because it's a porter cabin, when they're jumping for the songs that they're doing, the whole building shakes.
Amazing.
When the helicopters go overhead from RAF Benson, all the windows judder. But it's a real hive of activity, and people feel very welcome there. That comes through really strongly every time we ask people kind of what words they associate with the Berin Centre and with coming to us. It's that they feel welcomed, they feel accepted, they feel like it's a home from home. And that absolutely feels part of our remit to be providing that space.
Yeah, beautiful. That really, really came across. You know, people just interested in one another, talking, wanting to talk, wanting to find out what's going on. And as you say, there's just a hustle and bustle. So that new building is an incredible achievement and really beautiful kind of, as you say, you know, light, bright, purpose-built structure. So do you want to say a little bit more about how that came about and also kind of like the process of designing and creating it, because it wasn't just the Berin Centre. You actually opened up the process to the local community to realise that vision.
Yeah, well, and importantly so, because I don't know the first thing about building a building. It feels like it took a really long time, and also that it was no time at all when that was just a piece of kind of barren land on our site with a couple of sheds on it. Berinsfield doesn't or didn't have a cafe. There was nowhere really that people could meet in a kind of social setting. So what we found was that at the end of all of our group sessions, people were hanging on for ages. It was really hard to get them out of the door at the end of one of our groups. And it was because they were having a great time talking to each other, and there was nowhere else for them to go and do that. If you strike up a new friendship, it feels like a big leap of faith to invite somebody to your home for a cup of tea. That's kind of three steps further down the line. So for all sorts of reasons, that's just one of them. We decided that a cafe would be a really good addition. And we spent a long time consulting. We asked local residents and local partners if they thought a cafe would be a good idea. If they did, would we be the right place to host it? Were there any concerns that they had about it, any ideas they had? And then we went down a real rabbit hole of inclusion and consultation around running focus groups, more surveys, understanding what people wanted it to feel like and look like, and what they were worried might happen. Were they worried that people would have, if we had sofas in the corner, would people compete for the sofas? So we went for all chairs. So, things like that, really understanding what people wanted from the space. And then we put all of those thoughts and perspectives together into sort of a proposal, and we handed that to our brilliant architects at LAPD Architects, and they really used that as their user manual for the whole project. They took every single suggestion or request that was contained in there, and they built that into their plans. So when we then presented those plans back to the community, there was real recognition. There was, yes, this is what we were talking about. You've got that right, which was really validating. And then we took that off to our construction company. And again, they really understood that this wasn't their normal sort of project. So they actually had to hire 2 additional team members for the project. One was a builder and one was an administrator. And they hired both of those people from the village. So they went out of their way to advertise in Berinsfield first. And they made opportunities for people to come and see the site. We did loads of updates. And then throughout the rest of the project, as we chose things like door handles or light fittings or floorboards, again, we consulted with people every step along the way. So when they came into the cafe, the things that I kept hearing were, firstly, I chose that. That's the one I voted for, which was this wonderful sense of ownership. And I knew it would be good, but I didn't know it would be this good. So they had faith, because they'd been involved every step along the way and there'd been so much transparency, that we were going to deliver the vision they wanted to see. But we were able to surpass that when we put all those pieces together, which was, really wonderful for us.
That's phenomenal. I think just credit to the quality of the relationships that you hold, and the direct channels, which mean you're able to listen and have those trusted conversations. And we talk a lot on Make Space about the dimensions of spatial justice, and one core one being not just how you share and democratise the access to land and space, but how you hand over the pen and democratise the whole design process. And I think that you're a really inspiring example of how to do that really well and really thoroughly, and it definitely showed. And I know we got a bit nerdy when we were there, of looking under tables to the small details of, you've designed your tables so that they can change height and have plug sockets integrated, so they're a cafe table one moment and then they're a cooking station for a cookery class the next. And I just thought, what brilliant sort of genius flexibility that you've designed into it's a small space, but it's very well thought out and curated. It sort of comes through your passion, your energy for the work and everything you're talking about. But do you want to just say a little bit more about kind of like what drew you to the Berin Centre, and what particularly excites you about the work personally?
Yes, I love working at the Berin Centre. I've had a lot of really lovely jobs. I'm very lucky, but this one is my favourite. Don't tell the others. I think what I love about the Berin Centre is that over the last kind of 10, 15 years, I think we've seen charities getting more and more specific and more niche. And I think that's partially because funding for charities is more scarce. So we're needing to be much more clear about who we're going to reach, what the eligibility is, specifically what we're going to do, what we're targeting. But I also think it's because statutory services have become so much more stretched. And that means that they are raising their own eligibility criteria. They're at the sharper end of whatever it is that they do. And that means that we in the charity sector are doing more and more complex work. Now, all of this has led in lots of the charities I've worked for the mission of that organisation to become so specific. And it's starting to cut people out, or cut out creativity, or cut out flexibility to be able to respond to different things. When I arrived at the Berin Centre, I read the mission statement, and the mission statement is to provide family and community services for the people of Berinsfield and the surrounding area. And that is deliciously broad. That is it allows so much breathing space for you to respond to what the community needs from one year to the next, for you to be doing work with pregnant women and work with older people and with growing food. It allows us to be all of those things or none of them at any given time. And for me, that means that I get to be leading a really diverse team of people who have got so many different skills and expertise. And I get to really monitor closely what's happening in the community, to understand what their needs are today, and to try and anticipate what we think their needs might be tomorrow, and to come up with really creative solutions with them for what they might think might meet their need. And I don't think there are many organisations that get to be that kind of inquisitive or exploratory anymore. And I really enjoy that about the work that we do there.
So well articulated, and such a kind of clarion call to move away from this kind of more and more siloed mentality where, as you say, services are getting ever more specific, and therefore just responding as a sticking plaster to what is a crumbling, if not totally broken system. And the holistic nature in which you work is really powerful. And so maybe let's dig a bit more into that idea of kind of, responding at the scale of the neighbourhood and the specifics of the place, because you are doing so many really both inspiring but also kind of like joyful projects. What is it about the characteristics of how you're working that have meant that you could adapt? And maybe we could draw out some of the projects that you showed me when we went to visit on site that are really, kind of bringing people together in new and inspiring ways. I'm thinking about the growing spaces and the gardening project you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, the garden's a great example because I think on the face of it, like lots of our projects and activities actually, on the face of it, the piece of work is really simple and might look a bit fluffy on first glance. So we've got things like, you're just doing some gardening. Yeah. That sounds really nice. I was talking to a group of people last week at an event about our craft group. We have a monthly craft group. And, that sounds, really sweet. A bunch of older people that get together and do some cutting out. But actually, it's always so much deeper than that. And the impacts are so multifaceted. So for our gardening, lots of people in Berinsfield don't have gardens. Those that do, they're often small or they're shared. And if they do have gardens, some of them, we've got a set of allotments in Berinsfield that's always oversubscribed. So there's definitely interest in gardening. But there's not really a sense that the land belongs to the people. Berinsfield is one of the most recent villages to have been built in the UK. And it was kind of just plonked together. People love living there, and there's a real sense of community pride. And Berinsfield is theirs, but there's not that connection to the land itself. And we wanted to try and rebuild some of that connection. So some of it is about having people believe that any of those green spaces in the village, actually they are entitled to be using and enjoying and benefiting from in a whole range of ways. It doesn't just have to be that scrubby bit of grass verge. It can be something more if you want it to be. We also have quite high levels of food insecurity in Berinsfield, so helping people to realise and remember that they can grow food themselves. We've got small convenience stores, no big supermarkets, no greengrocers, no markets. So actually being able to grow your own fresh produce is a huge asset to families that live there, as well as it being something nice to do as a family. And also we know that people in Berinsfield really care about the environment and climate change in a way that we might not have anticipated them doing. When we were asking about the cafe, one of the first things they told us they wanted was that it had to be very eco-friendly. And they gave us lots of examples of how they wanted that to work. So again, we know there are a number of people in Berinsfield who are maybe slightly older, who are using traditional gardening practices, which are really not good for the environment. So a big part of our efforts there are about showing sustainable gardening techniques and introducing permaculture principles, which, it can be huge for reinvigorating the green space in and around Berinsfield. And then, of course, layered on top of that is all the wonderful social and well-being and physical fitness benefits that go with gardening. So for something that looks really simple on the face of it, our 2 community gardens actually provide a huge amount of opportunities for health, for learning, for connection to where you live and shaping the place that you live. So it's always a bit deeper than the activity might at first suggest. But I think having something that is an unintimidating offer for the person that will access it means that they can access all those benefits. If I went around door to door and told them, come and learn about permaculture and saving the environment,
can you imagine? But
it's too scary.
Totally. But the garden announces itself as you arrive, doesn't it? And it's so welcoming. You've got, all the beautiful beds, but you've clearly also been working with young people to create some of them. And there's some beautiful sculptures and art interventions there as well. You've got a kind of swapping and exchange sort of seed library and resource library there. So it is very much a kind of like invitation to curiosity, which is so lovely. And you get that sense of, as you say, you're bringing the community together because there's young people involved, but also elderly and kind of like the wisdom and the knowledge of the more senior folk that live there. So it's really wonderful. And it's not, you say, it sounds lovely and fluffy, which is so often how these things are seen, which are really foundational and kind of quite radical. But it's not easy, right? So actually, how do you get your hands on the land? How have you managed to do that? Because there's a whole story that we can't just sort of skip over about how you actually claim the space as the Berin Centre and demonstrate how to inspire others to claim the space that, as you say, they have a right to. So go on, say a little bit about how that's come about.
Well, we're on a bit of a mission to reclaim some of the green spaces in Berinsfield because they're really piecemeal. We've got really strange kind of jigsaw of land ownership in Berinsfield from housing associations, district council, county council, and it's quite complicated. And it means that people don't really feel like they can do anything with a lot of the green spaces. Our community garden started with this small green space just outside of our fence, and it was district council land, but they forgot to mow it, chronically forgot to mow it. So we would always mow that bit of bit of grass. And eventually I was speaking to someone in the active communities team and said, look, we've got this bit of land. Do you think maybe there's someone you could ask if we could do something with it? And she said, oh, it's not really my area of expertise, but let me ask about. And the word came back through the grapevine that I couldn't have it in writing, but we were given squatters' rights. If we wanted to do a bit of gardening on that space, or if our fence blew down and we wanted to move it a couple of metres, then okay, but they couldn't formally give it to us. So we started kind of adopting our squatters' rights. And we started with just a couple of raised beds, and we've built and built and built on that space, and it's now, planted kind of right to the edges. And as you said, there are sculptures and there's a greenhouse and all kinds of things. And at this point, if anyone in the district council turned around and acted surprised, which I don't think they will, they're very supportive, thankfully. But if anyone in a kind of high position said, you shouldn't be doing this is our land, actually it would look so bad to kind of take out all of this wonderful development that we've been putting in place. And it's clearly very community loved and community owned. So I don't think they will. I think it's very safe now. We don't need it in our lease. That's not important to us. They don't need to sign it over, but we're very happy to tend it for them. And I think it would look really bad on them if they changed their mind and U-turn. So it works for us. We've then got all these patches of land across the village, and we don't need to think about the permanence or the legacy of anything that we're planting in any of those spaces. But actually one of the things our gardener did last year was she took a group for a walk around the village, and they did some guerrilla planting in some of those green spaces. And that's enough. It doesn't have to be anything more formalised than that sometimes. Having said that, we're now, because of the work that we've done in those 2 small community gardens that we've been working in, we're now able to have different conversations with the landowners in the village, and we're looking to perhaps take on an acre of green space in the centre of the village to develop, and that would be on a lease basis, which is probably not a conversation we would have been able to start with. We needed to show them what we were able to do and how we would approach it in order for them to trust us enough to even have that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, credit to you to just, the spirit of action, but wouldn't it be wonderful? What if the system was actually much more supportive and enabling and didn't rely on you having to kind of sneak in, exactly, and go through sort of like back channels. And it's really exciting to hear how you're building step by step, kind of at the speed of trust, these relationships with the local people and the land. And it sort of has that resonance with what MakeSpace talks about in terms of a hub and spoke model, where you have these incredible kind of multi-activity spaces that are bringing lots of different groups and ideas together, and then these smaller spaces that are essentially drawn together by the quality of the relationships and the support that you're able to offer, and seeing that rippling out in a really beautiful way. Before we come to the final, the big glimpses question, as it were, should say a nod about the huge amount of change that's kind of facing Berinsfield right now. It was designated as a garden town, I think, back in 2019, and there's huge plans afoot to build so many thousand more houses. I think 1,700 is mooted, which will more than double the size of the village. Incredible amount of change. What do you think are the kind of both the challenges and the opportunities of that kind of scale of development on a small village, and the crucial role, influencing role that you could play with the knowledge and the skills that you hold?
I mean, it's something that feels really significant for the village, but also it feels like it's kind of old news for the villagers. So the consultation has been going on for well over a decade.
Right.
It will continue for some time yet. There's no kind of sign of shovels going in the ground. But despite that, it's always the way, isn't it, that you have to invest a huge amount of time in participating in these conversations, because if you're not at the table, there will be a day where a conversation happens that really matters and you weren't there. So we're really fortunate to be invited to be on the steering group for the Garden Village developments. And sometimes that can feel like it's very slow progress, because it's a huge convening of kind of the land promoter and the district council and the county council and the housing associations. But actually we all do need to be there, going at whatever pace this development does or doesn't go at, because we need to be representing both the existing residents of Berinsfield and what any new development might mean for them, and whether it brings regeneration of the existing village or not, or what that might look like, how we try to create social cohesion so that there's not separatism between the new development and the existing settlement, but also thinking about the needs of the people who might one day live in those new homes. What do they need from community spaces? Do our existing community assets serve them? Will they be able to take on the influx of additional people? How will they feel about the people that live in the existing village? So it's trying to kind of do the mental gymnastics of working out what people need now and how this development might impact those people and those needs, but also predicting what the needs might be in 10, 20 years' time for people that we haven't met yet. And I think it's just trying to remind all of those other agencies as well that that's what we're trying to do. Everyone around those tables have got their own agendas, and they are important agendas. But at the heart of all of it, what we have to keep drawing people back to is that there will be people who live here, and there will be people who are needing services here and meeting places here, and they need to stay central to all of those discussions. That's what I see as our role.
Absolutely, and how lucky that you can bring that and not just advocate for it, but you're demonstrating it, and you can, you've got a what works model. You can say, come and look, see, and hopefully, as Berinsfield develops, so will if not the Berin Centre, then the alchemy that you've kind of developed in the Berin Centre, so that knowledge and that wisdom in the place isn't lost. So yeah, here's hoping, and thank goodness you're in those conversations. So just let's go then to the final, the big question, and one that we're sort of like threading through as the common theme of this series, which is what ingredient you might like to offer up from all that you've learnt leading the Berin Centre, and perhaps from previous roles as well, for co-creating a future that we all want to be part of, that builds towards spatial justice, and that fosters a sense of belonging and centres health, equity and joy.
When I hear that question, the word that comes to mind for me is iteration. I know that I change my mind on small issues and big issues on a weekly basis. I maybe read something new, I become better informed, or I have a life experience that changes my view, or I have a conversation with someone that changes my perspective. I change my mind all the time. And I'm entitled to do that. I think sometimes when we are working with people, there's been a lot of talk over recent years about kind of consulting or co-production or lived experience, and that's great, and it's right that we're having those conversations. But I think sometimes we interpret that to mean we involve them over here in this particular phase of a piece of work, whether that's service planning or setting objectives for a charity, or if it's creating a building. This is the point where we involve the people. And in my experience, you can't just snapshot someone's needs or someone's views or someone's wants. And everything that we do at the Berin Centre, the example I gave with our community cafe, but also all of our work, is that we get a sense from people what they are, what the gap is right now, or what they're crying out for. And we kind of put something a bit half-baked out into the world. And we purposefully do it in that way, because if it looks too finished, it doesn't invite comment or challenge or curiosity. We put it out there saying, we think it might look something like this. Is that what you were thinking as well? And then people feel much more able to say, no, you're so wide of the mark, or actually this component is what we wanted, but this bit over here isn't right. The timings of that session isn't what we're looking for, or we want a cafe, but we don't want it to serve that kind of food. And then we continue to iterate together. So we have lots of opportunities for people to shape what we're doing, and we can change our mind, and they can change their minds. I think we've worked really hard to bed into our culture at the Berin Centre that we're not precious about our work. If one day people turn up and they say, we don't want the community larder anymore, it's not working for us, then we'll stop doing it. We'll do something else that meets the need better. We've built the cafe, and we're definitely getting a lot of positive feedback from the community at the moment. But if one day they say, actually, we don't want this to be a cafe anymore, we want it to be different, or we want it to be a cafe, but we don't want you to run it, fine. You know, we've built a building, and we've purposely built it in a way that it can be versatile and it can change. So I think the kind of key component for us has always been that we need to protect people's abilities to change their minds, because their needs do change, and we need to be able to reflect that in our service planning or in our building planning at every step of the way.
I really love that. It's so crucial. And again, you know, it's sort of so wise, because it sounds so obvious, but it's so overlooked and forgotten, is this idea of constant iteration, the vitality of a place. And it's almost like you're designing your infrastructures, your programs in constant conversation and dialogue. And, that's a live and ongoing process. And it makes me think of, when we talk about Make Space, this idea of building as a verb and place as a verb. It's constantly alive and it's constantly evolving, and you have to be in dialogue to make sure that it's sort of, there's an equity in that and a balance in that. So that's really beautiful. Thank you. It also kind of makes me think of a quote from Eric Kleinenberg, one of those wonderful authors who talks a lot about social infrastructure, in terms of it being kind of that most fundamental level, not just bridges and cables and concrete, but it's about who we are and the kind of society that we want to live in. And I think that just really resonates with all the work that you're doing at the Berin Centre. It offers up that sort of beautiful glimpse of a society that really cherishes deep relationship, and the wisdom of place and the people that live there, and is responding to the needs and the dreams, that sort of now and future generations. And by operating at the level of place, you're tackling things systemically, inherently, like holistically, through that family, community, food combination. And it's a very hopeful and holistic way of working. So, thank you for bringing all that inspiration today. And maybe just finish, is there any shout outs you'd like to do for encouraging people to support you and get more involved in the centre's work?
I think my standard call to action is to come and visit Berinsfield. I think Berinsfield has a particular reputation that I don't really believe it deserves, and that there are such a wonderful collection of people who live there and exciting activities that are going on. And I would just invite anyone who's at all curious from anything we've talked about to come and grab a coffee and see for yourself. There is nothing that will replace being able to come out into a community and see the people who are living there going about their lives, and see the kind of services or opportunities that are helping them to thrive. So, just come and visit us in Berinsfield.
I can attest to that. Get some great coffee, delicious food, and maybe, dig over a plot and do some guerrilla gardening.
We'll put you to work for sure.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Laura.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to Glimpses of a Possible Future. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, or why not share it with a friend?